in due course. Core participants will also be in a good position once they receive the relevant documents for each phase of the inquiry to make further suggestions if they feel that there are any areas where further documents or information ought to be sought. To conclude, I've laid out where the inquiry stands at present in procedural terms, but we are here to listen to all core participants about how this inquiry should proceed, so that in our planning we can take careful account of what they say. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Millett. Now, Mr. Johnson, you're here for the Metropolitan Police Service, I believe. Would you like to say something now?
Chairman, as you know, my name's Jeremy Johnson. I appear with Amy Clark, instructed by Sarah Winfield for the Metropolitan Police. There are many families, residents and survivors, as well as other core participants, who have important submissions to make to you. I don't have any applications to make, and I don't want to eat into their time, and I won't do so. What I do want to do briefly is three things. Firstly, to provide some information about the police investigation. Second, to provide some observations about the different functions of your inquiry and the police investigation. And third, to provide some observations about the consequences of there being two parallel investigations serving different but linked functions. First, the police investigation. We have, through you, published to core participants the terms of reference of the police investigation. The Metropolitan Police is committed to carrying out a meticulous, thorough and fearless investigation in order to identify all those who may have committed criminal offences and to refer files to the Crown Prosecution Service for decisions on prosecutions. That is a process that we respectfully submit is desperately needed and carries with it a huge level of responsibility to the public generally and the victims of the fire in particular. The criminal offences that are being investigated include, but are not limited to, offences of manslaughter, offences of corporate manslaughter, misconduct in public office, and breaches of fire safety legislation. Nothing has been excluded from the scope of the criminal investigation. Outside certain counter-terrorism inquiries, the investigation is unprecedented in terms of its scale and complexity. Just to give some figures, as at last Monday, 187 police officers and civilian staff had been assigned to the investigation. Well in excess of 31 million documents had been gathered. 2,500 physical exhibits had been seized. 2,332 witness statements had been taken from 1,144 witnesses. And 383 companies had been identified as having some involvement in or connection to the construction or refurbishment of Grenfell Tower. There were some 3,916 investigative tasks or lines of inquiry that had been generated. The Metropolitan Police has instructed a number of forensic experts to consider every aspect of the cause and spread of the fire and smoke. That involves careful analysis of every room within the tower, as well as every inch of the communal areas, and, of course, importantly, the outside of the tower. After that analysis has been completed, there will be a series of further forensic tests, including reconstructions. The full and accurate picture of how the fire spread and took hold can only be obtained from that forensic evidence once it's in complete form. The Metropolitan Police does not expect it to be complete until the autumn of next year. Interviews of further witnesses or of suspects in the light of that examination are therefore not likely to take place before autumn 2018. Of course, the police wish that this could be done more quickly, but there is a robust logic to that timetable, And all I can say is that my client is committed to keeping the families and survivors updated as to the progress of the investigation in regular briefings. Chairman, secondly, the different functions of your inquiry and the police investigation. Your inquiry, established by the Prime Minister, serves many vital functions that cannot be fulfilled by a police investigation. Most importantly, it ensures a public examination of everything that is within your broad terms of reference, and a public examination in which core participants can take part, including in particular families, survivors and residents. That is not something that a criminal investigation can do. The police are absolutely committed to the regular briefings I have mentioned, but everyone, I think, understands that a criminal investigation cannot sensibly take place with the sort of publicity that a public inquiry can and must. Conversely, Chairman, your inquiry, as you have made clear, cannot make determinations of criminal liability. That is something that can only be done by a criminal investigation, followed, if appropriate, by criminal trials. Justice can only be achieved in that sense if that process is able to take place such that any individual or corporation who may have committed a criminal offence is held to an account in an independent and fair investigative and judicial process. Third, the consequence of the two processes running in parallel. There are two extreme options that could be adopted. One would be for the inquiry simply not to start work until the criminal investigation had been completed. We do not and have never suggested that that is appropriate here. We respectfully agree that it is possible for the two to run in parallel so long as, importantly, there are appropriate safeguards to prevent prejudice to the criminal investigation. The other extreme would be for the inquiry to launch immediately into a public examination of every aspect of its terms of reference without any regard to the impact that might have on the police investigation. I do not understand anyone to support that approach. The middle course is for the inquiry to make use of evidence that is obtained in the course of the police investigation, but to do so in a way that minimises the risks of prejudice to that investigation or subsequent criminal proceedings. That is the course that we respectfully suggest, and it's reflected in the Memorandum of Understanding that has been agreed between the police investigation and your inquiry, and which, in the interest of transparency, is published on your website. That course is also consistent with the phased approach that the inquiry is taking, and which is in any event rendered necessary in order for the inquiry to report on urgent safety issues within a time period which is simply not compatible with anything other than a phased approach. Chairman, it's not easy, and it will give rise to many difficult issues on which judgments will have to be reached, but nor is it impossible. This approach means that the inquiry will have the benefit of material produced by the criminal investigation. It will, for example, have all the expert reports that are produced. That, of course, does not mean that the inquiry or the inquiry's experts are obliged to agree with the experts who have been instructed by the Metropolitan Police. The inquiry is entirely independent of the Metropolitan Police, as are you and your inquiry team. The inquiry has, with a high degree of transparency, instructed its own experts, who are themselves independent, and the police have provided them, where necessary, with access to the tower and physical exhibits. That means that your inquiry can reach its own conclusions as to the cause and spread of the fire and smoke. It is, we respectfully submit, important to recognise that the inquiry is very different from adversarial litigation. Precisely because it is independent and performs an inquisitorial function and has its own independent experts, there is or may be less of a need for it to hear evidence from experts instructed on every individual business or corporate body that may have an interest in the outcome of the inquiry or the criminal investigation. Indeed, it is simply not safe or practicable to allow unfettered access to what is a crime scene to experts instructed on behalf of many other bodies. What I can say is that there will come a point when it may be possible to allow limited and controlled access to the tower where that is necessary, and we will certainly engage with the inquiry and other core participants in relation to that. Chairman, we note that in the written submissions of at least one corporation, issue is taken with the conclusions that are said to have been reached by forensic experts. I am going to resist the temptation to engage with that. We respectfully submit that it is not an issue on which it's remotely appropriate for you to rule at this stage. It will, of course, be open to the inquiry and core participants to test the evidence in the course of the hearings. Chairman, that is all I wish to say on behalf of the Metropolitan Police. Thank you.
Very helpful. Thank you very much indeed. Now, Mr. Fried.